Good morning. I have a challenge this morning in that when I came in and I looked at the setting, I am delighted to be here, Peter. I saw the people all the way in the back of the room. Now, I need your help. If you're in the back of the room, wave to me so I can know you're hearing me, first of all. Good. Very good. And if you get bored while I'm talking, put your hand up like that again. All right? Several years ago, one of our fellow presidents asked the question, how long can college students focus in a lecture before they begin to fade? What do you think the answer is? I heard 18 minutes, 10 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. So some of you are getting ready to fade on me right now. Is that right? I also, though, checked with the neuroscientists at NIH, and they suggested that there's a certain amount of time that people in general, even disciplined educators like yourselves, can focus before you begin to fade. What do you think the answer is? I heard 22 minutes, 5 minutes. My fellow president said 5 minutes, so she's telling me she's about to fade on me also. All right. It's 20 minutes. But of course, you fade, then you come back. But this is the reason I bring that up. One of the things that we have done in our University System of Maryland, and Bob Coretta's here, and my colleagues from other campuses, as well as UMBC, is to think about how we interact in that teaching and learning process. And the more interactive we are, the more likely it will be that an audience or students will be willing and able to continue to connect. And so I'm going to be asking you a few questions as I go through this over this next half hour. And I'll be talking about our new book. My colleagues are here, Philip Rouse and Peter Henderson, and I wrote this book called The Empowered University. And I thank Peter for giving me a chance to come and talk about it and about some issues in higher education that I think are very important, that we think are important. And I want you to begin with the notion that when we say the empowered university, and we'll be signing books after this session, we're saying universities should be like a society, and that is empowered to look in the mirror at self and to be honest with self about the good and that which is challenging. And the fact is that so often we find ourselves having to talk about the good, but we don't take that time sometimes to look to say, okay, but where do we need to improve? How can we improve? What's the process we're going to use? I've got a group of colleagues here today who are from UMBC, and I want them to stand because I'm glad to hear from all the areas of the campus. You all stand. I want you to give my colleagues a round of applause. And my AC fellow also. I'm very proud of them. I'm very, very proud of them. And they represent everybody from biochemistry to analytics to information technology to student affairs to research to all the areas to analytics. Now, here's what I want you to think about. The way we think about ourselves, the language that we use, the way we interact with each other, all these things reflect who we are and who we will become. And I use this all over the country. I am known for telling stories. How many of you in the room are from the South? Good, you got a good group, good group, good group. How many of you are from what some people would call the North? Let's see who would, how many are from the Midwest? How many from the West? How many from the Southwest? So Baltimore is in what we call the Upper South, Upper South. One day we think like Philadelphia, the next day we think like Richmond. It depends on the issue. All right? Been that way since the Civil War. But I grew up in the Deep South, in Birmingham, and many of you have heard me tell my story so many times as a child, growing up in Birmingham, having a chance to hear Dr. King, being inspired with the idea that tomorrow could be better than today, and having the experience of being a child leader in that civil rights movement, and learning so much about the possibilities if we empower people to understand the possibilities of being much better. During that period, 1963, I'm often reflecting on how that period in the 60s represents about a 50-year tenure of higher education going to another level. And I want to show you what I mean. Number one, in 1963, within a month of my being in jail as a student, protesting the idea that we were not getting the education we deserved, the governor of my state stood in the door of the University of Alabama and said over his dead body, would he let people like me come to that university? I'll never forget looking at my mother and saying, why does he hate us so much? And she said, he's a product of his environment. You just get the knowledge and you'll be okay. Just get the knowledge and you'll be okay. Similarly, in that same year, within that same 2-month period, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC was founded. The charter was given by the legislature. And what made it different is that it was the first university in our state founded at such a time, early 60s, that students of all races could come there. Because for every other southern state, as you know, institutions either were for blacks or for whites. We had the wonderful HBCUs, we had the other institutions. So here we had this experiment. And I would like to think that as I talk about this empowered university, as my colleagues and I were writing, we kept thinking about the notion that we represented an experiment for the entire country. And the question is, how do we bring people from all over the world, from this country, of all races, all backgrounds, low-income students, middle-class students, everybody, and bring them together in such a way that they can prepare to lead and to participate in this democracy. And the challenge that we face is that we're still trying to understand, in many ways, where we are in this experiment. Let me tell you what I mean. What percent of Americans do you think in the mid-1960s had graduated from college, from a four-year institution? What do you think? Now, don't let me say APLU is risk adverse. You got to try. Let me hear it again. I heard 30%, 20%, 18%. Anybody else? In the back, 8 or 9. It was actually only 10%. Only 10%. All right? Now, with that said, at that time, everything was broken down into black and white. We didn't talk about the other groups in the census or whatever. I can prove it. How many of you remember black and white TV? Oh, you look good. You really do. My students, when I say black and white, what do you mean? TV's always been in color. No, it really was not, right? But so if you break things down in the 60s into black and white, just for a minute, what percent of whites, if 10% of Americans, what percent of whites had graduated from a four-year institution? I heard 13, I heard 20. 20, it's only 11%. And for blacks? Between 3 and 4%, primarily the HBCUs, all right? And so think about it. In the 60s, 90% of families that never had anyone graduate from college. It was still new. It was considered a privilege. Just one more point. Yesterday was Veterans Day. We had this great celebration. Of course, we should for the people who have served our country. But how many of you remember reading about the GI Bill? You've at least read about it, right? I don't think many people were around in the 40s, but right? But which group did not want veterans to get into the colleges? Who do you think? Which group fought against veterans being given a GI Bill that would allow them to go to college? Somebody said privates. Who at the privates were against it? Who was it that really fought against it? It was the Ivies. Yep. I mean, Peter's a smart guy. He's used to getting A's, so he said it. The fact is, presidents of the most prestigious private universities in the country, from Harvard to Chicago, said if you allow these veterans into our institutions, our universities will become, quote, academic hobo jungles. Now, that's the 40s. And that was because they felt that these institutions were for people of privilege, and they were the ones who had the ability to do it. But within 1 year of having this GI Bill passed, 1 million veterans came, and all of a sudden, people realized regular people could go to college. Now, it still was mainly white guys, a few minorities, a few women, but still the idea that regular people could go to college, and you went from 4% to about 6%. Up to about 1950. So you began. So by the mid-60s, when the Higher Education Act was passed, all of a sudden, people realized more that regular people might be able to go to college. And what happened was, as people went to college, they got good jobs, and people realized this is a way of moving out of poverty into the middle class, and it made a big difference. So today, what percent of Americans have graduated from college, age 25 and older? I heard 60. 35, 50. How many of you don't know? Let's say that. Great. And it's important for us to know these things as we talk about the theme, higher education matters. The fact is that today we can say about 30% of Americans have gotten a four-year degree. 30%. And now we break it down by all the groups. So, for example, what's the fastest growing group in our country? Hispanic, Latinx, right? And that group, only about 14 to 15% have graduated from college, from a four-year institution. Keep in mind, 40-some% of all students start at two-year institutions, and they do a fine job. Give community colleges a round of applause. Give them a round of applause. But I'm talking right now about the four-year institutions. What percent of whites have graduated from college? 45, anybody else? Somebody in the back. What'd you say? 50. It's actually only about 37, 38%. And for blacks, it's about 23%. Native Americans below the Hispanic group. What's it for Asian students? It's about 50-some%. About 20-some% of my students are of Asian background. Many students are the children of people who come into grad school, and they have the highest achieving rates. So put it together. This is what I want you to hear that we should all appreciate. 2/3 of Americans today come from families where no one has graduated from college. Now, when I say that to my friends of every race, the first thing they say is, that couldn't be true. Everybody I know has a college degree, duh. College administrators know college administrators, right? Teachers know teachers, lawyers know lawyers. Plumbers who do pretty well know plumbers, okay? People tend to be around people with similar backgrounds. But I tell you that for this reason. As we think about the challenge that we face, when I say that the way we think about ourselves and the language that we use and the way we interact will have such an impact on who we become, the fact is that you only really appreciate what higher education can do for a family when you've been a part of it. When you hear the media saying, oh, people are questioning higher education and all of that, how many families do you know where the parents went to college and they don't want their kids to go to college? I mean, if you look at our students, so often that background, right? And so the challenge we face is to help more people who may not have had the college experience to get that experience. Now, here's the other point, though. The majority of parents want their kids to have post-secondary education, many higher education. And the question is, what do we need to do to make the difference? Here is what I want you to think about. A number of groups, including NACUBO and others, have come up with all kinds of language. And APLU, I saw your editorial that you did, Peter, just recently. We're all talking about it. And it's true that whether talking about the amount of money you make, or whether or not you become a voting citizen, or whether or not you're living a healthier life, the more education you get, the better off you are. But the big question becomes this. What are we doing at our universities to make sure that they're doing well? And here is the reason we decided to write the book. How many of you at your institutions know you need to make more changes than you're making right now? Let me see your hands. How many of you know you may not be being as honest with yourselves as you need to be? How many of you know that there's too much tension among different segments, faculty, staff, and students? How many of you know that a lot of people at your institution don't really know what you do? How many of you know that some people on your campus get on your nerves? And that's why I'm glad I've got colleagues here from faculty, staff, and administrators so I can say we can all be much better. Let me tell you my definition of leadership. Leadership means keeping everybody minimally dissatisfied. I want you to think. Give me a round of applause for that idea. Because as soon as one group gets really happy, other groups are down, right? And so with that said, what we have worked to do in our book is several things. Number one, the book is written in my voice, because I've been the president there a long time, but it's written with my colleagues, with the provost and with Peter Henderson, who's from the National Academies, is now in the president's office, and with our working with focus groups. One of my major messages today is we must know ourselves, empowered to look in the mirror as a society, as a university, as a person, and to know oneself. That means understanding, the numbers. I am a mathematician. I get goosebumps doing math. But my colleague, the chancellor, the chemist, we can appreciate all that. But we know from working with the legislature, from working with our donors, from working with the alumni, from working with the entire society, the better we know ourselves as a University System of Maryland, as a UMBC, the more comfortable we become in using passion to pull resources to help us as we work to help people understand, for example, how research makes a difference in solving the problems of humankind, how we have to have more students in STEM and more students in humanities and arts. And so the idea for us of this book was to do focus groups. We've been getting a lot of credit for being innovative and moving up the ladder in all the rankings, and we always call those rankings a beauty contest until we're on the list, then we become very beautiful. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We all complain until we're on the list, then we all make copies of it and send it around, right? We all play that game. But the fact is that we decided to listen to our colleagues and to ask good questions. And we did it especially because two things that happened for us at UMBC that really were profound. Number one that we could never imagine. We are a campus with students from 100 countries. We talk about international diversity, domestic diversity. We are known in science, but really strong in theater. We do the kind of theater that either makes you really depressed or pisses you off, all right? That's our theater. Academically speaking, we make people perturbed. You get it? And the fact is, so we do Beckett. You know, we do the kind of the interesting theater for the hard questions. And I tell you that because we're constantly seeing ourselves as a place focused on the life of the mind. Now, with that said, my line until 2 years ago was that my basketball team reads really well. Give me a big round of applause for that. My basketball team reads really well. And I said that because they do, but because we rarely won a game. So all of a sudden, we end up dazzling ourselves and the students, and they beat UVA 20 points. And we were so honored. Give my students a round of applause. Give them a round of applause. But we were even more excited because we were the national cyber champions. Give us a big round of applause. We did the cyber thing, right? But I tell you that because the question that we raise in the book is this. What happens when something either really good happens or something really bad happens? How do you respond? That's for a society, that is for an individual, that is for a university. And for us, it was exciting to have the publicity and all of that, proud of our students. And yet, there were those who said, you see, you should have been working to be bigger sports. You ought to put some of that money, pump more money into the sports, because you see what kind of recognition you got. And the campus needed to look at itself and say, who are we? Who are we? We know we don't have so much money. If you got lots of money, you can be great in a lot of things. If you don't, and most of the campuses, most of us don't have just stupid money where you can do anything. You've got to focus in a way to be excellent. And it was really amazing to hear my colleagues, faculty and staff, administrators and students saying, this was a great moment to have that kind of athletic success. We're not going to start thinking we're going to have that all the time. We want to be respectable. Of course we do. We're very proud of the fact that we've got solid academic students who are also athletes, and they did well, but we don't have the kind of resources, and that's not who we are. And so we listened carefully to the campus in deciding to be as balanced in thinking about, for us, what does respectable athletics mean? And how can we work to be competitive, yeah, but to make the number one priority the academic success of those students. And then just within a few months, we had what a lot of campuses are having, a Title IX protest. And we had just had a training. We thought we were doing a great job. The fact was we were not listening as carefully as we needed to, that we didn't understand how we could be thrown off by legal situations, and that there was more to be done. And what I said in the protest, and we had an amazing experience with students who were very upset, and it was on me as a president of more than 20 years to think about that question. Who am I? Who are my colleagues? Who is the university? And I said several things to the students. Number one, I have protested myself as a child and in college. Number two, it is your right to let us know when you're not satisfied. Number three, I apologize that we haven't done a better job on several levels. They were telling us we were not as responsive. We had been working to be responsive, but given the level of resources, we had not done all that we could do. And most important, I wanted, and my colleagues and I wanted them to know we were hearing them. And that while we may have thought we were doing what we needed to do, we were not doing enough, and we needed to do more. And so part of the book is to say to the leadership of campuses, even when you thought you were doing the right thing and doing things well, you can be taught that, no, you need to do more. There's more to do, and you start by doing the same thing we did in the athletic situation, and is to listen to what our colleagues and students are saying, and then based on that listening, to act. And so we have something, if you go to our website, you'll see Retriever Courage, and we have an implementation team, and we have put twice the amount of resources in this area because it's going to be important for the country as it is for our campus, and because it's the right thing to do. I want us to give this country a round of applause for working to do the right thing when it comes to the health and safety of our students. A round of applause for that, please. And here is the message, that we were empowered to say we can be better. We were empowered to say, let's look at the challenges, let's make a difference, and then let's evaluate what we're doing. You know, I have a TED Talk that people either agree with or they don't agree with it, and it's about science, and I'm going to talk about that. But the 4 principles in that talk have to do with our expectations. We always talk about our expectations, but often it's the expectations of students. The question is, how do we raise expectations for ourselves? Do we know our students? Are we disaggregating the data? Are we using analytics as we think through trends, as we look at performance in classes, as we look at the strength of teaching and learning, as we look at the research productivity, even as we look at the administrative operations? Are we expecting enough of ourselves? Have we set the bar high enough? And have we thought about how we get there? Number 2, that it takes a community of people supporting each other to go to the next level. And number 3, I say in that talk, we say in the book, it takes scientists to produce scientists, but I would argue it takes those of us who are educated to pull others into education, to help people understand the life of the mind, to help people understand critical thinking skills, to help people understand how we go about evaluating what we do. And then finally, we all need to put so much more emphasis on evaluation, on honest evaluation of where we are and what else needs to be done. And so whether talking about what happened at the beginning with that athletics, what happened with Title IX, what we do in our discussion of empowering a university is to talk about what are the big challenges. And I want to just mention 2 or 3 of them. And so the subtitle of our work is the idea of shared leadership, culture change, and academic success. And the shared leadership, we all talk about shared governance, but the question is, how do we expect more from all of us? How do we come to understand that the goal, if the goal, first of all, is to make sure our students are succeeding, within, for us, a research context, but that our students, undergrad and grad, beginning with the undergrad still, and then secondly, how do we go about determining the best way of pulling everybody into that work? I think you've had conversations here about students of different types. It is important to disaggregate the data. It is important to talk about gender and race and income level and LGBTQ, all the ways in which we're different, because our society has become more enlightened to understand we're not the same, that there are differences among us, and we need to respect those differences, and we need to understand how they're doing. And for us, and for a lot of you, looking at the performance of students in different disciplines, and I'll get to this notion of science and engineering and where we are with that, within a context that we also take great pride in the support we give to students in the other disciplines, arts, humanities, and social sciences. There are 2 or 3 things I want you to think about. Number 1, we have desegregated much of higher education in that many campuses have students of all races, but we have not truly integrated. I don't care where I go in this country, public or private, we will find that people are very uncomfortable, first of all, talking about some of these issues, and part of being empowered is being empowered to tell the truth. To say it in a way, though, that doesn't upset people, but will get people to at least think about it. And I want you to think about it. If you were walking around on your campus, are you likely to see people from different backgrounds, racial and ethnic and religious backgrounds, interacting, or do you primarily see people with people like themselves? And that's whether it's public or private. And don't miss my point. There are times when it's great for people like each other to want to get together. Times when women may want to get together, times when people of color, certain groups might want to be together. But a part of our challenge in higher education, in American higher education, as we think about, as we're on our campus, internationalization, as we work with ACE on the coherent approach to not just having people from different people. We're proud to have people from 100 countries, but how much are they getting to know each other? Do people from the Eastern Shore of Maryland get to know people from Baltimore City? Do people who are from Africa get to know people from the Middle East or from America? Do people from different religious groups get to know each other? To what extent are we proactive in creating a culture that encourages and supports people to get beyond their comfort zone? The line that my colleagues and I use a lot at UMBC is, get beyond your comfort zone. It's so easy simply to be with people like yourselves. And for us, as we look at our Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement, we are thinking about how to hear other perspectives, how to listen to other people. Our VP for Student Affairs will tell you we have opportunities for people from different political groups, Democrats, Republicans, independents, progressives, all to come together and to have speakers who are provocative, who may in some cases upset people. And our theme is, how do we learn to agree to disagree agreeably? How do we learn to agree to disagree with some civility? I can disagree with you, but it doesn't mean I have to start shouting and hollering and becoming angry. There's a line that I often use that says, those the gods wish to destroy, they first make angry. If I get angry, I can't do my best thinking. And I may say things that I regret later on. And so how are we as institutions teaching our students to prepare to lead in this society, in the world, and in this country? It was Fred Lawrence, the head of Phi Beta Kappa, who said that the three most important things that we have to learn to do is to teach educated people to present their point of view and back up that point of view with evidence. Number two, to listen to different points of view and look for the evidence in order to analyze, not whether or not I simply agree, but whether or not there is some message here that I need to think about. And the most important of all, though, was this: to teach people to find the common ground. To teach people to find the common ground. When we argue about our elected officials at any level, and we say what they're not doing, I want us all to remember those elected officials, almost all of them, are graduates of our institutions. Think about that. And the question I'm always asking myself when people come across the stage is this: are they different from when they first came in? We all value the liberal arts, but if students go through philosophy and literature and history and they come out simply reinforcing everything they've been told all their lives, have we truly educated them? And so I want to challenge us to be empowered to not only appreciate what education does, but to ask the question, what else must we do if our graduates are to change what we see in the world? When my students say to me right now, Doc, things have never been this bad, the first thing I do is to say, let's go to history. Let's go to history. Let's go to the 60s, either the 1960s or the 1860s. At either case, you see the same thing. And what am I saying? I'm saying we've been through these experiences before. Personalities may change, but I want us to think about how on our campuses, while we look at the larger society, we decide how to do what we say in this book about culture change. Eric Weiner, in his book, The Geography of Bliss, says that culture is the sea we swim in, so all-consuming that we fail to even recognize it until we get out of it and look back at it. And what's significant about that I want you to appreciate is that on every one of our campuses, our culture is the essence of who we are, our values, our attitudes, the incentives that we give, the ways in which we punish people, the questions we ask, the questions we don't ask, how we do, what we believe in. All of that's our culture. And I challenge you, APLU, every institution, to think about, have you looked carefully at the culture of your institution? Do you appreciate the intersectionality of students? Some of the younger staff members from APLU were talking about the fact that it's not enough to talk about the one factor of minority or race or gender or low income or first generation college or Muslim or Jew, whatever the group. It is, how do we see them connecting? And how do we understand that if you show me a campus that's doing well with kids who are minorities, I'll show you a campus that's looking at all the students. Because much of what you do for one group makes a difference for the other. One of my colleagues, Mike Summers, who's here, is a biochemist, and he focuses on producing large numbers of people of color, African Americans in particular, who go on and get, in fact, he's one of the leading producers of blacks who've gone on and completed PhDs in biochemistry. Give Mike Summers a round of applause. I'm very proud of that. And so the sessions that we're having today involving replication of our Mauhoff program. The Mauhoff program was started to increase the number of students of color, starting with African Americans and then others of color, and then underrepresented groups, including first-generation college, who are able to succeed in science. Peter Henderson and I chaired this, he directed and I chaired the study on underrepresentation in STEM. And what we found that was shocking was, well, first of all, it didn't surprise us that only about 22% of the 20 to 22% of blacks and Hispanics, Native Americans who start in science and engineering will actually graduate with a bachelor's in those areas. What percent of whites who began with a major in science or engineering actually graduate in those areas? What do you think? I heard 70%, 40%. Only 32% of whites who begin with a major in science and engineering graduate in science and engineering. And for Asians, 60, 50, it's actually about 41, 42%. Now here's the part that's so shocking. We all wanted to say, well, it's a K through 12 problem. Because see, colleges blame K through 12, blame high schools blame elementary schools blame the family, and the husband says it's the wife's side of the family. That's the problem. We always blame somebody else. But when we looked at it, what we saw was often the higher the test scores, the more socially prestigious the university, the greater the chance the student who starts in science leaves it. Did you get that? Because they start off perhaps with the second level courses, they get a C, they change their majors. And what's the result? Only 5% of our degrees are in natural sciences and engineering. In Europe, it's about 11%. So we have worked on that issue, starting with minorities and with the Mauhoff program, and now we've produced more African Americans in our predominantly white setting who've gone on to complete MD, PhDs around the country than any university in the history of America. Give my colleagues a round of applause for that. But what we've learned that helped minority students, now we are using to help students of all backgrounds, of every race, first-generation college, and a lot of programs. And a part of it is something we have from our system, course redesign, the idea of rethinking how we do chemistry, of rethinking how we do a number of the courses across the disciplines, getting away from just the lecture and having more interaction, more use of technology, more real-time assessment, and it's made a big deal. I've been working with APLU right now, looking at some of the, and then the idea of looking at trends, and looking by group, by gender, by sex, by race, all those factors as we try to think that through. So what I want you to think about is how we can help each other in this process. We have been very fortunate to replicate that program at Chapel Hill and Penn State. We've got a piece in science you can look at, and it shows that those students are doing so much better. As a result of that, we now have funding from Chan Zuckerberg to replicate at Berkeley and San Diego. And so we know that it can be done. Most places call the first year of science and engineering what? What's the words we use in America to define or to describe the first year of science and engineering in America? What do we say? Weed out courses. And so my challenge to you today is to be empowered to get rid of that idea, to stop thinking it has to be that way. It does not have to be that way. We can produce more women in technology. We can produce more minorities and first-generation college students. So that's one of the major things. How do we rethink our approach? The word that we changed at UMBC was from the word smart. We used to talk about UMBC as a place where it's cool to be smart. We got rid of that word because if this is the smart group, what are we telling all the other students? You get my point? When we said they're the smart kids, what's everybody else thinking? So the word we now use is grit. And we've been using it for 20 years. The name of the Chesapeake Bay Retriever is True Grit. We say we're the house of grit. It's the idea of resilience and perseverance and persistence and hard work and never, never, never giving up. That's a part of the culture of talking about, because too often on campuses, kids come in thinking, well, I can't show people how hard I work because then they won't think I'm smart. And so how do we rethink that idea and remember that if we are comfortable with the way things are on our campus, probably a lot of people are not. And then the final point I want to make has to do with civic engagement. We're at this point. 100 years ago, what is the most significant thing that happened in civic engagement 100 years ago in America? when you think about citizens of this country and democracy, women. It's only 100 years ago this year, women's suffrage, that law was passed. Before that, women could not vote, all right? And even though there had been legislation that talks about African Americans after slavery, it was until 1965 that most of them could vote, even though, and why do I tell you that? Because what I want you to think about is this notion that we have the opportunity as universities to support and create a kind of culture that has more people really wanting to vote. I'm very proud that we've gone up and doubled the numbers of percentages on our campus to about half who are voting. And I want to leave you with a story. And it's a story about my grandmother, who grew up in a rural town in Alabama. And I'll never forget, she wanted to vote in her hometown. And there was something called the Alabama literacy test. And whites could use an X if they couldn't write and vote. Blacks had to pass that test, which was rooted in the Constitution. And she went and took it the first time and she failed. And it was obvious that she needed a lot of help. She had some of her other women friends to go. And the second time, she had to memorize the questions, different parts of the questions. They memorized the questions. They came back and put them together. And then my mama, the English teacher, worked with her and helped her with her friends to learn that part of the Constitution on that test. And so by the third time she went in there, she passed that test. And when she came into the house, she looked at me and she said, I am a voting citizen of the United States of America. She was 70 years old. How dare we not vote in this country? Give my grandmother a round of applause for doing what she did. I want us to understand we have the chance to be passionate about what we do. We cannot afford to allow media or anybody else to tell us that what we do is not important. We know from our own lives that we would not be here if it were not for an education. And so I want you to think about the words of Mary McLeod Bethune, wonderful friend of Eleanor Roosevelt's, who said that when a person came to see the school she was creating, and he saw how torn up it was and how it was so pitiful. It was a school for girls in Florida. And he said, where's this school you want me to create or help you with? And she looked at him and she said, in my mind, in my soul. And that passion she had created that school, and so many women of color became educated. I challenge you, APLU, to watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Dreams and values. We are so special, higher education, and we can be even better. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We got time for a couple questions. Questions, please, give me some questions. My ACE fellow is evaluating me over there, so she and the chancellor are working on that way. Come on, somebody. Question, please, give me a question. Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
I love this history that GI built.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
President of my university, John Hanna, and some of the other public universities.
Yes. Yes.
Really were the pushing.
Yes. Yes.
And it seems to me that there is a peril, and as you say, certain people oppose it.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And it seems to me that, without being negative about the individuals, it seems to me that today, when people talk about not everybody needs to go to college.
Right.
Certainly, there are great careers.
Yes. Yes.
Doing apprentice and other
Sure.
but it sometimes has the same feel.
Yes. 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 Say that last part so they can hear what you said, Peter. Say that last part.
Sometimes has the same feel of
Yes.
1945.
Yes. His point, he raises a very good question. He says that sometimes, it's true that people can have different pathways, apprenticeship programs, 2-year programs, whatever, But he said sometimes when people say it, it has that same feel of the 40s. The college was meant for a few, or for a few of those. And I do think it's important to continue to highlight the history of what people thought about who should get a college education. There is no doubt that while we have many pathways people can take, those who will be the ones to change the world, the ones who will be the leaders, will be those who get that broad liberal education. There's no doubt about that. And that sometimes others may start at another place and move to that level, but I do think we have a responsibility to keep giving children the chance to aspire to the possibility and to keep working on giving them examples of people who've been able to do it. Give Peter a round of applause for saying that, would you please? Thank you. Yes, go right ahead.
Hi, Freeman. Thomas Freeman from UNC. You were talking a lot about civility and being able to have this civil discourse. And my question is, how do you suggest that we deal with situations where we are having conversations filled with intolerance with other people, right? So maybe they are being civil or nice in the way that they say these things, but what they're really espousing is deep intolerance for other people. So how do you suggest we deal with that?
Right. I'm a strong believer. I mean, he's saying, how do you deal with people, even if there's civility when there is a lot of intolerance? I honestly believe in the power of building relationships one by one, and in the role of leaders in saying those things that are so important for our society to say, whether it's about respecting people who are different, understanding the perspectives of people who've been the victims of whatever, who are survivors, or whether it is about recognizing we may have very different points of view. We've had that on our campus. Because we're there in the Upper South, you've got some people who are with grandparents who are from the Confederacy and great-great-grandparents from the Confederacy, some from the Union, some who are the descendants of slaves, right? And the question becomes, how can we understand each other's perspectives and learn how to have that discourse to reach some agreement, even if it is not saying we agree with everything? But the only way it's going to happen, and this is what we say in the book, every campus will have its challenges, will have its protests, will have those periods when people are really upset. The best thing that can happen is for leaders, that means faculty and staff and students, to get to know each other as well as possible before the crisis. Before the crisis. So when necessary, you can pull somebody to the side and say, help me out here. I mean, I'll never forget when we were going through our challenge a year ago, we had student leaders whom we knew we could pull together and say, give me some perspective here. What do you suggest that I do? It was wonderful to have our survivors group, who could say, Doc, this is what you need to do. You've got to have a listening session where you say nothing, but you've got to hear how people feel, right? And they said it for two reasons. One, because they wanted people to have a chance to have their say. And two, they wanted me to hear those different perspectives. But three, they were being supportive of me and saying, we don't want you to have to get into a big fight with people. We want you to be able to really understand it so you can figure out how you can help us to have a safer environment, okay? So it was their caring enough about administrators to say, we're not just here to beat up on you, but we want it to be better. We want to speak the truth, but that came because there was enough trust. There's the word I want to leave you with. It's when talk about values, that I think it's critical that our leaders, whether they're faculty leaders or staff leaders, administrators, or student leaders, come to know each other well enough to trust each other. And the thing I always say to people on our campus is, why are we here if it's not because we care about our students? It's not like we're making that much money. Come on, there are always ways you can make more money and not have to deal with all this. I mean, it's about wanting to care about education. And so trust is the word I would say. And finally, first sentence in our book is, it's not about me, it's about us. I don't think we can say that enough. Repeat it after me. It's not about me, it's about us. Now, that may sound corny, but it's important. It's really important because we tend to point to, at every level, the one person. And the more we see the strength in us, the more synergy we can develop. It's a great question now. Yes?
Good morning, and thank you for your comments. My name is Matt Tarr from the University of New Orleans. You mentioned about 2/3 of the population is not college educated,
yes.
And that's a barrier to getting those children into college.
Yes.
You also mentioned programs on your campus to help those students and others to be more successful.
Yes.
I was wondering, do you have efforts to reach out into those families pre-college
Yes.
to
Great
help
question.
them to understand that pathway?
That's a great question. We have a lot of pre-K through 12 programs. If you look at UMBC and Lakeland Elementary, we have a consortium of inner city schools. Our campus is at the BWI airport. So we've got almost 600 acres right outside of the city, all right? It was a farm before it was a campus. But the key is that we work with the whole region, the corridor, Baltimore-Washington corridor, from the intelligence community to the schools. And so we have a number of programs designed to strengthen teaching and learning in pre-K. It's always important. I think a college president should be as concerned about early childhood as about a PhD program. Give me a round of applause for that idea. Early childhood, because it starts there. And so we have put special initiatives into building teachers to work in challenging schools, and millions of dollars in the endowment now. Sherman Scholars Program, for example, focuses on math and science teachers in Baltimore City, in middle schools, and now a program for early childhood. But secondly, if you look at the UMBC and Lakeland articles, you'll see other schools there. We've moved children who are with free lunch up to the state average. And Maryland is best educated in the country for all practical purposes, Maryland and Massachusetts. But so to get them to the state average is a big deal in math and reading, and that has been our emphasis. Secondly, we've got a lot of other programs, including 2 upward bound programs, as you might expect. The choice program is perhaps our most revolutionary. We've been doing it 30 years. It is for first-time offenders. They are mainly boys of color, some low-income white boys, girls in some cases when they're in gangs, but they are first-time offenders. And the judge gives the child a chance to either be an mother or grandmother, whoever it is, to be in our program or go to jail. We've been doing it now 30 years. We've served about 10,000 families. We make sure the kids are up in the morning, in school during the day, work with the families. We bring them to campus in the evening, and we get them back up the next day. And we do that for a year and a half. And we've been able to prove through Democratic and Republican governors that we can make a big difference. And so the idea of having the evaluation that shows the difference can help you to help those families. Now, do they come to UMBC? No. But we get them into upward bound programs. We get them to other kinds of alternatives, into smaller institutions, for example, and all kinds of options. The big challenge for children from low-income backgrounds of all races, number one, beyond the stress of being in that environment and its impact on learning, will be the sense of self, whether we are teaching that child to really feel good about self. And number two, reading skills. As a math teacher 40 years, give me a child who can read, and I can teach her to solve word problems. So reading and thinking skills would be the issue. I want everybody to stand. One last question. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Adel Shir Mohammadi, University of Maryland system as well in College Park.
Yes.
I'm so proud, and thank you for your great remarks. My question is that in the last few decades, we see
Excuse me, there's a young lady who I didn't see you there. Come back. I'm going to get your question to it, and we'll stop. Okay, go right ahead.
We see in the reports that the economic gap between
Yes.
the haves and have-nots
Yes.
is really widening in our country
Yes.
here. And with that, then land-grant universities that was built really around democratization of education, do we as land-grant universities have new challenges that we have to meet to actually open our doors even more and further at whatever level to those that economic gap actually is putting them behind?
Right. The big issue of the income inequality, the Nobel laureate who just won the award, I mean, we know that we've got this concentration of wealth. We know that we need people at every level looking at policies that will give workers, quite frankly, more funds, even as we work to train more people, because you can train somebody to have a job, but if the job doesn't pay enough to pay for the family, you still have a problem. All right. We also know there's a very strong correlation between education level of parents, level of income, and academic performance of the students. We know that, right? And so for me, land-grant institutions, public universities should be doing as much as possible, first of all, in working with pre-K through 12, to have more children prepared to come. Because if they're the lowest income, we want to keep looking at Pell Grants and what we can do to help with that level. But the two things would be to make sure they're ready to come in and succeed academically, right? And that means, so for me, for public institutions especially, connecting aggressively to what's happening in communities through civic engagement, through tutoring, through working with teachers. All those things are more important than ever. And then finally, being creative in coming up with ways of helping people to pay for their education. I love the fact that we've got large numbers of our students working in our Office of Information Technology. We getting them those kinds of jobs. If you've not looked at the Greater Washington Partnership for the region between Virginia and Maryland, look at what we're doing right now to look at ways of giving humanities and social sciences majors technology skills so they can get jobs too, because so many of these jobs are going to require more technology. Probably the most exciting program we have for girls and young women in technology is for middle school girls. It's in coding and yoga. Did you get that? For middle school girls, coding and yoga. And it really works. And you know who funds it? The National Security Agency. Look at it, because we've got this big problem of young women in technology. Thank you. Last question.
Yeah,
Last
thank you for your comments. Anita Enriquez with the University of Guam.
Yes.
So when you asked how many are from the South, in our tiny little island, I'm from the South.
Okay.
But a lot of what you have shared with us makes sense. But we have to think from the notion of context.
Yes.
And so when we speak about context, we speak about diversity. We thought we never had a problem with diversity because most of the students from at the University of Guam are Pacific Islanders.
Yes.
And so when you think about the continental United States, the landmass, we think of ocean.
Yes.
That connects all these different islands in Micronesia, the freely associated states, the Republic of the Marshall Islands. We have to think about the notion of climate change, and now you've got climate refugees.
Okay.
Not just on our island, which is the gateway to America and our part of the world, but also climate refugees in the continental United States.
Okay.
Underrepresented minorities, the demography has changed.
Yes.
Because underrepresented minorities are Micronesians, they're Marshallese, they're Pacific Islanders.
Yes.
They never knew that there were people of color.
Yes.
Because
Okay.
in their world, you know, I'm
Sure.
not black, I'm
Sure.
not red,
Sure.
you know, I'm Pacific Islander.
Yes.
So as we think across this room, and we love the fact that we are a land-grant university, we think about access, we think about social mobility, economic mobility, and how our institutions provide that opportunity.
Right.
But these Pacific Islanders across our institutions, they're not known.
Right.
So I just wanted to bring that to light. And
Thank
so,
you for representing
yes.
Pacific Islanders.
Yes, thank
because
you
that
very
is one of the
much.
categories. I do appreciate that. Give a round of applause for that, would you? All right, I'm finished. Stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up. As Peter comes up, stand up and repeat after me. We in the Academy can be so dignified. Stand up, stand up, stand up. Repeat after me. Thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. Thank you all very much.